and Toastmaster.
Thank you very much. At this point, I would like for the timer to explain what it is that he does and why it is so important that although we be mesmerizing with our speeches, that we keep to a certain time. Is that important? Or do we continue to mesmerize the audience with our lovely tales under the sea and of castles under the water and of the lovely Julie, whose character I do not know, and I also believe Miss Lara Sanchez has a character, unless I am mistaken. Please excuse me, madam.
Absolutely, Miss Ariel or Sebastian, although I cannot unsee Ariel here. But I will have to tell you all that in the human world, as opposed to under the sea, time is a little bit more important. And I will tell you why. Let me try and find something that you can relate to. If you go out of the water because you're mesmerized by those feet that you are so infatuated with, although I don't know if you as a crab are also infatuated by feet, but if Ariel takes you out and she stays too long out of the water, you know what happens to fish, right? They suffocate. Yes, fish suffocate out of the water. That is why we, as public speakers, whether under the sea or above the sea, need to always be very time conscious. There is no time to be mesmerized forever outside of the ocean. Hence, I will give you the times for the speeches that are prepared between 5 and 7 minutes. At the 5-minute mark, I will show the yellow background. At the 6-minute mark, I will show the, 5 minutes is green, 6 minutes is yellow, and 7 minutes is red. Similarly, for the table topics, which are typically between 1 and 2 minutes, I will show at the 1 minute mark, I will show green. At the 1 minute and 30 mark, I will show yellow. And at the 2 minute mark, I will show red. Madam Toastmaster.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I believe Shankar is also our table topics master, if I am not mistaken. Can you give us another mesmerizing explanation of what this impromptu speaking session consists of, please?
Absolutely. So if you go outside of the ocean and then you sneak back into the dark water, but your father finds out that you've been out of the ocean for too long, he will put you on the spot and ask you for an explanation, right? So on your feet, you need to explain to him why you were out so long. And that art of speaking off the cuff is called impromptu speaking, or as we call it in Toastmasters, table topics. Me as the table topics master, I will guide all of us through this process, the whole school of fish, so that I can direct few answers to people who may or may not be prepared for that, and then they will have to speak and be creative.
Thank you for explaining what it means to speak on your feet and be creative, and for explaining the mesmerizing new concept of time to a Jamaican crab. Although I have no feet, I will try to do my best. At this point, I would like to go ahead and proceed with our first speaker, who is Miss Lara Sanchez. And can you please tell us what your character is?
Yes, Madam Toastmaster, I actually don't have a character, I just have a pet.
on my shoulder. So Ollie has decided to join us again for the evening. So hopefully my speech will be more mesmerizing than the bird on my shoulder as I speak. With your permission, I'm going to share my screen. So to get my speech started this evening, what I wanted to talk to you about was a carry on of my last speech where I talked about genealogical principles. And I'm tying this at the end back to my leadership coaching pathway that I'm on, which will become evident at the end of my speech. But first, I want to give you a little background about my family. So my father's name was Leslie W. Boyer Jr. His father's name was Leslie W. Boyer Sr., and my great-grandfather's name was Harry W. Boyer. Now, Harry W. Boyer was married to a Miss Mary Elizabeth Sheehan. So this story is about the mystery of Mary Elizabeth Sheehan and where she was born and the stories I was told as a child. So the originating fact I had in this research was from my dad, who told me that his grandmother was named Mary Elizabeth Sheehan, Sheehan with one E, not to be confused with Sheehan with two E's, which is another common spelling of that last name, that she was in fact born in Ireland and her father's name was John, and they lived in Louisville, Kentucky. So this was a story I was told that I had to go on to do my research about Mary Elizabeth Sheehan. Now, a compounding factor in doing this research was the fact that vital records in Kentucky are only available starting in 1911 forward. And some of this predated 1911, which created some challenges for me in researching Mary Elizabeth Sheehan and her family. So I started where I could start, which was with the obituary for Mary Elizabeth Sheehan, which I did have a copy of from my father, which of course did confirm that her name was Mary Elizabeth Sheehan and she lived in Louisville. It also had the date on it, which you can't see in this picture, but that allowed me to be able to ask for a copy of her death certificate from the Commonwealth of Kentucky. This confirmed for me that her name was again Mary Elizabeth. It did also confirm, according to the reporter on this death certificate, that her father's name was John. And it also gave me an approximate date of birth, which was December 3rd, 1885. So this allowed me to continue to look for Mary Elizabeth in other records. So the only thing that was different in this birth certificate was that it listed her birthplace as Louisville, Kentucky, not in Ireland as my father had believed. So using that information, I searched and searched for Mary Elizabeth with a father named John in census records in Louisville and never found a record that matched. I did this for a couple of years, and the closest I could come was a Lizzie Sheehan who lived in Louisville, Kentucky, had a birth date in December of 1884, which was close, also listing her birthplace as Louisville, but it had different parents, a Chaz Sheehan and a Jenny Sheehan, and so I couldn't confirm that this was the right person. An interesting note on this record is there was a Senator Lippy listed as living with this family who was a boarder in the transcription, but if you looked at the actual record, Senator Lippy was a brother, not a boarder. And that's just something you learn from census records, that sometimes they're transcribed incorrectly. So then I went back to the obituary that I had to see what else do I have that I can go on. And I realized that in the obituary, there was a listing for Mary Elizabeth having a sister named Mrs. Frank Carnes. And I thought to myself, well, that's something new I hadn't realized and hadn't paid attention to. So I said, I'm going to start looking for who Mrs. Frank Carnes is, and maybe that will help me find Mary Elizabeth. Through census records, I was also able to locate Mrs. Frank Carnes and confirming that she was in fact named Ida M. Carnes, married to a W.F. Carnes, which stood for William Francis. And as many of you may know, Frank is a short name for Francis. I was able to confirm again that her name was Ida, which then allowed me to confirm or suspect that this was the correct census record for Lizzie Sheehan, Mary Elizabeth, because it listed a sister named Ida. So I decided to keep going down this research path, and as I kept going down this research path, I came across a death record for Ida Carnes. And this was able to confirm for me that Ida's middle name or maiden name was in fact Sheehan. And therefore I could surmise that she was in fact the sister of Mary Elizabeth Sheehan. It also confirmed that her parents' name were Charlie and Jenny, which was the names on the census record that I had found for Lizzie. So I said, I'm going to keep going down this path, and how can I confirm that Ida and Mary are in fact sisters? Well, I was in Louisville for a conference, so I stopped by the cemetery where my great-grandmother was buried, and I found her headstone, which again now showed me on her headstone a birth year of 1884 instead of 1885, which said in her birth certificate, so those did not match. Nonetheless, as I was walking in the same area of the cemetery, I came across, in fact, the headstone for Ida Carnes and her husband, W. Frank Carnes. And as you know, as many people know, families are generally buried close to the same location in cemeteries. So that also helped me to feel confident that these two were in fact sisters. So I kept following that chain, and I did, while I was in the cemetery, find a headstone for a Jenny Sheehan, but I was not sure if that's correct, and I'm still trying to confirm if that's the mother. But I decided I would see if I could find records on Charlie and Jenny Sheehan, and I found their wedding record from 1883 in Indiana, just across the border from Louisville, Kentucky. So that was great to be able to find that marriage record. Yes, thank you, Ollie. In addition to that, I was able to find a death record for Samuel Lippy, who was listed as the brother of Ida Carnes and Lizzie Sheehan. And I was able to identify that the informant on that death certificate was in fact W.F. Carnes, which indicated again that this is the same family. To go further, I was then able to find the death certificate for another sibling listed on that census record named Lillian. And this was the deciding factor for me because it identified the informant on Lillian's death certificate was in fact my great-grandfather, H.W. Boyer. So this allowed me to confirm then that that census record was correct. Now you would think, since I was able to do that in about 5 to 7 minutes, that this didn't take very long, when in reality, this entire research took me about 5 years from beginning to end. So the moral of this story is that, first of all, family stories are not a substitute for good genealogical research. But from a leadership perspective, what I learned from this is that you only get the answers to the questions you actually ask. So make sure you ask enough questions and the right questions. Because after I discovered all this, I went back to my father around 5 years later and asked him if he remembered anyone named Charlie or Ida. And he responded, "Oh yes, that's my great-aunt Ida and my uncle Charlie." If I had asked that question 5 years earlier, I would have sped up my research by about 5 years. So that is the story about how asking the right questions makes all the difference. Thank you, Madam Toastmaster.
Well, thank you very much to our Vice President of Education, Dr. Lara Sanchez, who is also the VP of Academic Success. And ladies and gentlemen, I hope now you understand why. Because she's able to present her genealogy that took her 5 years to research in such a short amount of time. Me, being the Jamaican crab that I am, would have taken 10. But it is true, you only get the answers to the questions that you actually ask. What an accomplished speaker, researcher, and mesmerizing competent communicator. Thank you very much for that lovely speech. At this time, I would like for the timer to give us 1 minute on the clock so that we may send messages and give a little evaluation to Dr. Sanchez. 1 minute, please.